have a look.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tokimaru and I'm here to have a look at Bye Sweet Carol. This is a 2D adventure game with platforming elements. It's developed by Little Sewing Machine and published by Maximum Entertainment. I have had this game on my radar for quite a while. It sells itself on having classic era hand-drawn Disney animation contrasted with darker horror elements. And I thought that was really cool because you don't get to see these sort of hand-drawn and animated games. The most notable one in more recent times is probably Cuphead, as everybody knows. Another game this actually kind of reminded me of is a little bit older. It's King's Quest VII. King's Quest VII was also a very similar sort of adventure type game with animation based off of Disney. Old hand-drawn Disney animation. However, it did not have the same horror theme in 2D platforming in quotes, you'll see when we get into the game, or the 2D platforming that this game has. But it's something that you don't see in games very often. Hand-drawn animation, especially this style of animation, can be extremely difficult, and trying to get it right can take a long time, which is why something like Cuphead took a really, really long time to release, and then when they made the DLC, that also took a really, really long time to release. So I do have a few criticisms about the animation of this game, but I do also understand that something of this caliber can actually be extremely long and arduous to implement in a game like this. Let's start by jumping into the options menu. We have quite a decent number of options. You don't need much for a 2D game like this. But there are quite a few things. As you can see, we have various languages for our subtitles. I do wish they would have a drop-down menu for this, just because if you switch it once, then you have to scroll through the entire thing just to get back to your language of choice. I would prefer a drop-down menu for that, just so you can click a specific language. We have subtitles on or off, subtitles black box, because I did have trouble reading the subtitles at some points in this game because this game overall has a really dark color palette. You can change the text size, and that's about it for the subtitles. I do think if we're going the accessibility route, you could probably add maybe special fonts that are easier to read for dyslexics, but other than that, that's pretty okay. For the controls, you can play with mouse and keyboard or with controller. The game prompts you to play with controller, however, mouse and keyboard does also work. I did have one problem with this that you'll see once we get into the game. There are a few prompts, specifically inventory, as well as switch character, where once we get in game, for some reason actually you can also see it here. For some reason it doesn't display the correct bind no matter what I do. Switching from controller to keyboard and rebinding the controls doesn't actually help. The inventory on I'm playing with an Xbox One controller, but the inventory button that I've assigned is the, I don't know, what would you call it? Select button? Traditionally, it's called the select button, but I guess it's probably like the share button or something. I don't know. But that's the button I have assigned to inventory. However, you can see here, it still says right. Pressing the right stick is the button there, but it's definitely not. Switch character also has this same problem. I believe, what is it? I believe it's actually left trigger on mine. No. It's left bumper. That's what it is. It's left bumper, but as you can see, even if I rebind it to a different button, it shows up. But if I rebind it to the button that it's intended to be, it's no longer there. And once we get into the game, it also shows these incorrect button prompts, which is mildly annoying, but it does keep the actual binding. So take that as you will. It's a bug that should be fixed, but it's not too annoying. It's annoying when you first get there. As typical horror games do, we have a brightness option, full screen on or off. We have resolution. One other thing, not that 2D games require that many graphical options, but this game actually has a little bit of a problem with screen tearing. I noticed it quite a bit during my playthrough. I think they should probably either add VSync or add a way to select your FPS. So that you'll see when we get into the game that does have a problem with screen tearing, and VSync would fix that. Audio, we have 3 volume sliders, music, speech, and sound effects. I would prefer if they also had a general volume slide, like an overall volume slider, but having these 3 bars is fairly okay. It's a fairly okay options menu. Now, let's jump into the game. So I have about 4-ish hours in this game. I'm currently on chapter 7, and from what I can see, it has about 10 chapters and clocks in at around 6 to 8 hours, depending on how fast you are. I'm going to be showing you a little bit of chapter 3, just because I don't want to spoil bits from later into the game. And I wanted to show the game off in a more familiar area. So you are playing as a young woman in 20th century England named Lana Benton. She is looking for her missing friend Carol Simmons, who has left her a note but has mysteriously disappeared. When the game starts, you find yourself in a mysterious magical kingdom. A lot of this game goes back and forth between Bunny Hall, which is the real life. So there are 2 segments of this game, sort of. There's real life, which take place in Bunny Hall in 20th century England, and then there is the mysterious magical kingdom, whose name I forgot, that you occasionally transport yourself, that you are occasionally transported into. Currently, we, as Lana Benton, were locked in the basement by, I don't know, what would you call her? The headmistress of this orphanage. And we were told to clean, and then things were happening with a weird, evil bird. This game actually has a lot of, it sort of runs on dream logic and goes back and forth between fantastical and grounded elements rather rapidly. I have a little bit of a problem with it in that it feels like it's difficult to discern whether or not it's intended that the magical dream sequences are intended to be figments of Lana's imagination, or whether that's supposed to be something that's actually happening in terms of like the story. But there are certain things that happen in the game that happen to Lana specifically, but then kind of go unaddressed. She doesn't talk to anyone about them. It's kind of weird, but I'm kind of okay with it because it seems like the game is supposed to sort of run on mystical, magical dream logic where things may or may not be real. They may be a figment of your imagination, and that plays into the horror elements nicely. We have arrived at a place where we have found this body. He is sort of a rubber hose cartoon character that you have to go find the head of. That is our current goal. We have an objectives menu, which is something that I think is actually really cool for an adventure game like this. Often in these sorts of adventure games, where you're going back and forth, you're looking for items, sort of like a more point and click adventure-y. Like I said, it's actually very similar to King's Quest. Those sorts of games where you're going back and forth, picking up certain items, combining them. This is my only item right now. But you're looking for certain items to put in certain places to unlock things and activate things. And if you leave the game for a little bit, it can be difficult to remember what you're actually supposed to even be trying to do and what you may need items for. So it sort of has this objective tracker that sort of helps guide you along but mostly is there to help you remember what you're doing if you left the game and are coming back. It also has a description of the chapter. There are, like I said, I'm currently on chapter 7. They have a different description for every chapter. So we are intended to walk around. We're currently in Bunny Hall now. Despite the fact that this is the real world, we do have these weird mystical magical creatures like this cartoon man here. And I do actually have a kind of a criticism about this. It feels like the game was going for more of, you know, classic Disney, Snow White, Cinderella, Disney princess type movies, but then it has this weird Mickey Mouse rubber hose guy, which I feel like doesn't particularly fit the A, horror theme of the game, or B, the intended Disney princess aesthetic. He feels sort of out of place. I know that Disney also has, like, you know, Mickey Mouse, but it feels really weird the way he's inserted into this game. So let me go find what we're supposed to do. It's actually been quite a while since I played this chapter. Okay, I know what we have to do now. So in this game, like I said, you're sort of moving from place to place. You're collecting items. Very typical adventure game fare. However, because this is also a horror game, it has horror. Whoops. Let me get up here. We have Castlevania stairs, if you haven't noticed. Because this is also a horror game, we have some horror elements. You may notice aesthetically, everything looks very dark and grimy. You can see Bunny Hall Garden, very nice. It's quite dark and grimy, and I believe... Oh! Okay, so this is actually something I forgot. So this game has a health bar. It automatically regenerates after you wait a certain amount of time. However, I feel that the health bar doesn't actually make too much sense, because for most of the game, you're kind of just walking around, and occasionally, if you get caught by something or lose a QTE, it actually results in instant death, and then you respawn in a checkpoint. Most of the time, the health bar actually doesn't matter. There are a couple points later in the game that involve combat. I was gonna say quote unquote combat, but it's literally combat. But for most of the game, you're playing as her, and she doesn't really have any combat moves except this. She can kick things next to the floor, and that's about it. There is a separate character that you get to play as later that has combat moves, and actually has a few different abilities from her that create some interesting situations in terms of puzzles. But for the most part, because she doesn't really do combat and most things result in instant death, the health bar, it feels like it sort of defeats the purpose of the health bar, making it feel out of place, but it might be more intended for combat. Now, another ability that we have, other than kicking things, is to transform into a rabbit. There's not really an explanation about this. Thematically, rabbits make appearances sporadically throughout the game. We are at an orphanage called Bunny Hall. Your character is occasionally called a little bunny. But you can transform into a rabbit that lets her move into small places. You can wall jump as a rabbit. As a human, you would not be able to climb this very high wall. You can jump surprisingly high for a human, but you're going to be doing a little bit of switching back and forth between human and rabbit forms, mostly for movement. I've found that the rabbit moves faster. So if I'm moving from place to place, I usually want to be a rabbit, and if you're running away from a monster during a chase sequence, you probably want to be a rabbit, despite the rabbit having a little bit less health. Here we go. So you may notice this game actually looks quite good. This game prides itself on its traditional animation, and the animation, okay, I have quite a bit to say about the animation, but the actual backgrounds of the game are very, very well done. You don't see these sort of more painted looking backgrounds that often. I think they did a really good job at it. The animation, you may notice in these sort of gameplay segments, the animation actually feels a little bit weird and off-putting and stuttery at points. It's not bad animation per se, but because she's sort of sprite animated, when you're switching between different animations, it can feel a little bit awkward at times. And there's this one big problem I've had with the fact that it's traditionally animated in a game like this. The way that her sprite is animated, let me try to, I don't think I can move this. It's animated at a lower frame rate than the way things move across the screen. So she moves left and right at, I don't know, my FPS is probably at like over 140. But she moves at a 60 FPS plus frame rate from left and right, but her actual sprite animations are at a much lower frame rate. And when you're moving very quickly, it's kind of hard to see because I don't have that much room. When you're moving very quickly, or when she's animated with wide sweeping movements, it can be a little bit disorienting because of the mix match in frame rate. Additionally, you don't really see it here, but at some points throughout the game, it'll zoom in on characters and the backgrounds look okay because they're drawn at a higher definition. But when it zooms in on the animated elements like characters or the window all the way up and to our right there, if I can show you this, just to say it's not just characters, but these sort of animated elements, when it zooms in on these animated elements, I've noticed that there's actually quite a bit of artifacting that just makes it look really bad. I understand that the idea is that they're sort of going for a film grain effect, but because I don't know what it is about the way it renders the game, when the camera zooms in on these animated elements, there's sort of, I don't know, it feels like compression artifacting. It looks really bad. I don't know if I'm gonna get to show you. But there's just a lot of problems that I have with the in-game animation. Occasionally, the game will switch to cutscene animation. The cutscenes are beautiful. Don't get me wrong. The actual quality of the animations themselves are very, very good. It's just the way that it's implemented in these gameplay segments have a lot of small problems that aren't too bad on their own, but over time they add up, and it just ends up looking really weird in a lot of places. Let me try to get further in the game so I can actually show you more gameplay that isn't moving left and right. I believe. What was I trying to do here? Oh, I think I had to look at that. I'm now realizing I think I actually had to look at that to activate the next thing that I wanted to do. So this game, like I said, it's an adventure game. You have a lot of just sort of moving from place to place, trying to find items, put them into keyholes. I keep on forgetting that we have fall damage. Because it doesn't matter until it does. Oh, I did already press this. So what do I need now? I think there was something I'm missing. Sorry, like I said, it's been a little bit since I played this chapter. There's no power here. I have to go downstairs. It's been a little bit since I played this chapter, and also I'm not paying attention to this for the most part. This might have been it. There we go. Okay, so let me get up here. So I'm in a section where we're going to start seeing some of the action and horror-based elements that I think make the game more interesting than just walking left and right. Excellent. Because, so for the most part, I actually think a lot of the puzzles aren't very interesting. Like, a lot of the puzzles are just seeing the puzzle element and moving it. Oh, of course, this is a kick it. Are seeing two puzzle elements that obviously fit together and putting them together, whether it be pushing a barrel to the left or pushing a box to reach a switch, or finding a key that says locker key and then using it on the locker. A lot of the puzzles are just use puzzle element A with puzzle element B and doing things in a certain order to make them happen. I feel like there aren't actually a huge variety of different kinds of puzzles, but the sort of action and horror-based elements tend to break up the monotony, which we should be seeing in a second, I believe. Some of these puzzles, I feel like some of the way some of these puzzles work, especially the ones in the real world, end up feeling a little bit contrived. Like, why did we turn on a pipe? Oh yeah, so here's the head of our little rubber hose cartoon character. I will also take the opportunity to let you
Whatever happened to her?
listen to the voice acting a little.
The black tower Mr. Basie was referring to?
Oh god. And you can see here, the way the characters move at a weird mismatched frame rate when they zoom in on the actual animated elements. Sorry. So this is the horror portion. As you do in quite a few horror games, if there's a monster nearby, you have to find a place to hide, and there is a hold breath mechanic. I haven't failed one of these yet. It feels pretty generous. What ends up happening a lot of the time is that you enter it and then you hold the button, and then right before your breath runs out, they sort of mellow out. But here is where we start getting into the horror elements. As you see, in a lot of traditionally animated shows, there are very obviously animated elements placed over the painted background. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. So if I were to move across here, you can see that these obviously move. And the animation like weirdly cuts off. So like I said, because of the way they implement, it's not that the animation is necessarily bad, but because of the way it's implemented in gameplay, it can look awkward and stuttery just because of the way the animation's cut off. But if I run past these animated elements, uh-oh, I made noise and now the monster's coming to get me. I better hide. She looks around a little bit. We're good. And I believe that you don't actually have to hold your breath if they're not in angry mode. So you may see sometimes if a monster notices us or if we make noise like this. This is a way that you can sort of lure the monster to a specific area in the... Oh, you're not gonna come get me? I can hear her in the corner. Oh, of course she doesn't want to come see. But if I... There we go. You can see when the monster sort of gets angry and starts chasing you. I don't think she actually saw me, but she heard me running around. We get these effects on the side of the screen that says that the monster is in search mode. So when they're in search mode, you have to hold your breath, otherwise they'll catch you. But if they're not, like she is right now, then you don't have to worry about that. You can just hide, and that's okay. Let me transform. I have to be very careful now because I need to get across. But I think this game does a really good job with its horror and stealth-based elements. There are some parts of the game that end up feeling annoying or contrived in terms in terms of how they implement the horror elements. And I don't know if we'll get to show you what I mean, but like I said, the sort of more stealth-based, the stealth-based sections and more action-oriented chase scenes can really help break up the monotony. Now, you see, we have a lot more of these animated elements scattered throughout the house because we are in a large area. We are in a multi-room area. That's my bad. Get me out of here. We are in a multi-room area of the building where we can be chased around the map by the monster. Good. Excellent. We can be chased around the map by the monster. And nice. Okay. And once she's in one room, usually that means she'll stay in that room until either you activate something with a cutscene or you cause some noise in another room. So for example, now that she's in the room on the right, she will never show up in any of the other rooms unless it's necessary. Or if I make a noise like this, and now she comes running. Now she knows, she has an idea where we are. I'm going to take a second to hold my breath. And these horror scenes, it can actually get pretty dreadful in some situations. But I don't know if you noticed. Whoop. When she did get near me, it kind of zoomed in and you could see what I was talking about with my criticisms on when it zooms in on the characters in these gameplay segments. One criticism that I do have about these sort of stealth elements kind of boils down to once you understand how it works, or once you've like been through an area, it kind of doesn't actually matter that much. I got to a point in this where I broke every single one of these breakables, like I'm doing right now. I got to a point in the game where I broke every single breakable in the overall area, not just in a specific room, but in the overall area. And it basically ended up making the stealth pretty trivial for the most part. And I ended up just having to kite the monster from room to room. And it got really annoying because the game makes you do a lot of typical adventure game puzzles. But if the monster happens to be in the wrong room, then you have to go through the whole rigmarole of trying to guide it to a different room. And it just ends up being more annoying than it does scary. I don't actually remember if she can find me underneath these. I don't think so. Yeah, I think we're actually good. But yeah, like... I keep on forgetting she can actually hear me run. But like I said, now that every breakable thing in this room is broken, if I kite her into a different room, then I can basically run in this room as much as I want and it won't matter. So that is one criticism I have about the stealth element of this game. Let me actually try to kite her into the next room here. I'm hoping I get to... Okay, goodbye. But yeah, you see what I mean? Now that we've gotten rid of the actual stealth elements of this, it's just about kiting her into different rooms, because otherwise she just insta-kills you. Miss Fisher's room key. Excellent. So now we're just going around finding puzzle elements, and as you can see here, in my controls, like I said, I have it set to select, but it keeps on showing the R button. But when I press select, that's when my menu opens up. Pressing the right stick doesn't do anything despite the prompt being there. So that is That is a bit of a bug that this game has. Unfortunately, I can't actually talk to this guy. Another minor gripe that I have is that a lot of the time, so you can inspect quite a few things in this game. Unfortunately, weirdly, me bringing up this criticism right now isn't actually as relevant as I thought it was going to be. But there are various interactables throughout the game where you can just inspect them and Lana will say something about them. And it's kind of funny. This room is sort of disproving my criticism, but a lot of the times throughout this game, there will be several interactables that you can look at and Lana will comment about them, but they don't actually do anything and they aren't really relevant. They don't inform you about Lana's character. She doesn't, it feels like she doesn't have that much of her own character. Sorry, she actually does kind of have her own character that you see throughout the cutscenes of the game, but when she's looking at things and describing them for you, it doesn't add to her character, is what I mean. Like, it doesn't really inform you on how she thinks for the most part. A lot of these interactables that you can look at, she just says, this looks like a locker. This door is locked. And a lot of the time they aren't important things. And it feels like a missed opportunity to sort of do more world building or character building, or just not have them be inspectable. Because there are so many things in this room that would be interesting to inspect, but like, what's happening here with all these rabbits and this knife? I don't know. Why wouldn't Lana want to comment on them? She can only comment on that one thing and these bells, and that's it. The bells are a good world building element, but a lot of the interactables in this game aren't really. And I feel like it's kind of a missed opportunity for a little bit of world building and character writing that unfortunately gets passed over. Let me try and find what I'm supposed to do. We're actually in quite a gameplay full segment. So this is actually really bad, I'm realizing. Occasionally, there are some parts of this game where the monster will be in a room where it feels almost impossible to do anything in. So you're forced to go back and forth between that room and a different room to lure them into the room that you need. This is what I was saying before, where once you get past the actual stealth and horror element of the game, you end up just having to go through a lot of rigmarole trying to guide her from room to room, to guide the monster from room to room, and ends up being more annoying than it does interesting. Like, honestly, this part where she's introduced is probably the best use of this throughout most of the game. There we go. Okay. And now we can do whatever we want. I believe I currently have access to like 3 rooms where you have to go through a couple of puzzle elements. We're good. Oh, God damn it, now she's in this room. Okay, we're okay. There's something stuck inside. Got it. But yeah, this is actually a bad example of what I was talking about in terms of the inspectable elements where there's a surprising number of things that are actually puzzle relevant here. There were, I believe in the next couple of chapters. Hello, goodbye. We're good. Oh! Me out of here? Oh shoot, she's gonna come in here. Goodbye. Please come in this room. No. Ah, oh, god damn it. You see what I mean when I say it just ends up being annoying? Because if you make one mistake, then you have to travel back and forth between more and more rooms. Now, I don't think I have that much more to say about the actual gameplay that we're going to be seeing in this segment of the game. So in later parts of the game, you get access to this secondary character, our funny little cartoon friend. Please don't kill me. I don't actually think she can get under the table, which is kind of funny. Oh, Jesus Christ! Actually, that's a good example of what I was talking about with the health bar. The health bar feels like it only matters for fall damage because, like you saw just there, when she caught me, it was an insta-kill. But yeah, that's a good example of that. So like I was saying, we have a secondary character that we can switch to in later parts of the game, and they make use of it in a couple of puzzles where you have to go back and forth between characters and use their different abilities, which I think are actually more interesting puzzles than the parts of the game where you're just playing as one person and you're having to go back and forth and collect puzzle pieces and unlock doors and do things. For the most part, that's not very interesting. I think the most interesting puzzles that this game has to offer are the puzzles where you switch back and forth with this character and the other character, especially because that character has an ability that lets him... Basically what he does is he can set himself on fire, or he can absorb electricity and move it from one place to another, which I think can... They actually make some really interesting puzzles with that. There actually is an interesting puzzle over here. Let me try to see if I can show you something. Actually, no, let's not. Because now I'm realizing a lot of these puzzles, or a lot of these times when you're going back and forth between places to do puzzles. Oh, hey, why are you here? So fun fact, this is actually a safe location. She can't get, this is a place where she can't get. Unlike what I was saying before with the tables, she actually can't get here. But now she's stuck in this room and you have to lure her to another room. But it takes quite a bit of time for you to actually move around, especially when you're getting up onto things and dropping down from places and going left and right. It's actually really, really slow because your character has to go through her full animation, and they do a decent job trying to keep the animations pretty speedy. But even after you let go of the control, it takes half a second for her to stop moving. And it takes like a full half second for her to climb or fall down from anything. So it makes traversing from place to place feel very slow and muddy, which I feel like at some points doesn't really work for a horror chase sequence game like this. Sometimes it intensifies the horror, sometimes it just ends up being really annoying. So that is another criticism I have with that. Now, I think I've gone over most of the gameplay elements. What's left is the story, because I think the main draw of this game is the animation and the story. So the story of this game feels like nothing. It feels like nothing, and it's kind of a shame to say. It feels like things happen to this character and then she never follows up on them. There are a few other characters in this game. There's the owner of the orphanage. Occasionally we have flashback sequences where Lana is talking to her missing friend Carol, where we expand on their relationship. But for the most part, she actually doesn't talk to a lot of the other characters about things that are happening. There's like maybe one very specific plot related thing that she talks to the other characters about, but for the most part she doesn't expand on anything. She doesn't really say how she's feeling other than, no, you can't do this, or no, that's bad. Okay, I guess I'll do that. Oh, but this, she just sort of like reacts to things. She doesn't really say how she's feeling. She doesn't, her conflict with other characters is that she's not a perfect little girl. So one of the big parts about this game's the real life, the narrative of the real life section specifically, a lot of this game is sort of about the advent of women's suffrage and sort of like women gaining their autonomy, and a lot of more I don't want to say the game has a feminist message. It just talks about it just kind of says things. It's really hard to explain. So basically what ends up happening in terms of this game's theme, it has sort of a feminist theme, but it doesn't really say anything about it. What happens in this game in regards to that is that characters say things like, women should be getting ready to go off and marry a man, or women need to be prim and proper. And then that's kind of it. That's like they're just like laying the groundwork that this game takes place during a specific era, and every character only talks about that one specific topic. And then in the flashback scenes with Carol, she says, I hope that one day women are free to live their own lives and vote. Like, the game doesn't really have, it feels like the game doesn't necessarily have a message or explain opinions on topics, or just like have characters think critically. They just sort of say, they just sort of, oh God, it's so weird. They just sort of explain the existence of topics. They don't like go into in-depth discussions on topics, which I guess like you don't want to bog your game down with having back and forth critiques with characters about that type of thing. But like, characters don't have in-depth discussions. They don't voice their criticisms about things other than the cutscenes. Even the cutscenes with Carol are like, one day I hope all women are happy sometime in the future, and that's about it. Like, Lana actually doesn't like butt heads with the headmistress about her opinions or her beliefs or anything. She just kind of accepts it. Like, there's one point later in the game where we have to do it's not even a rhythm game. It's just kind of a QTE game where you're dancing. You're supposed to be learning how to dance with a man. That's the idea about that. And what ends up happening is the headmistress is like, you need to become a perfect young girl and learn to dance with a man. And you go through this QTE game that isn't a rhythm game. It's very extremely not a rhythm game. It's just kind of a QTE game. And regardless of how well you do, I went through it and I got it perfect. I got an achievement for it. But I did it perfectly without making any mistakes. And one sort of plot related thing happens that makes Lana try to leave the room. And she's like, oh, you get back here this instant, young lady. And then another character comes in and is like, well, maybe she's not necessarily just because she doesn't align with your view about what a young lady should be doesn't mean she's a bad person. And it's like, but like, I literally did exactly what she asked me to. I learned how to perfectly dance like a young budding woman, and just because of an arbitrary story moment, it wasn't even like Lana being rude or unsophisticated or anything. She was just like, oh my god, there's a plot thing, I gotta get out of here. And then she knocks something over, and it's like, ooh, you unsophisticated young lady. It's so, it feels like the game doesn't do an actual good job integrating whatever story or message it's trying to tell in either conflicts between characters or the actual gameplay itself. Because like I said, I did exactly what they wanted to perfectly, and it still went along with whatever the narrative was with the headmistress. So that's kind of a problem I have with in terms of the writing. Another issue I kind of have with the story is that they don't really explain anything. Like I said at the beginning, it sort of has these ethereal, dreamlike qualities where you're going back and forth between these. Like right now, we're supposed to be in the real world, but obviously there's this big rabbit monster that never gets addressed, by the way, by anybody else. But it's sort of, I don't know, it doesn't really do a good job showing us whether or not this kind of thing is part of Lana's imagination, if it's how she sees the world, if it's just her opinion on this monster who's supposed to be a woman. She's like a specific person whose human form we never actually see. And then occasionally we wake up in the magical kingdom, and then we come back here, and then we go back there, and then we come back here. But it's always like you're just transported there at one moment, and it feels like they don't do a good job integrating the experience of going back and forth with whatever narrative they want to go with. Whether they want it to specifically be Lana's imagination, or a dream that she's having, or it's just how she views the world, versus people are actually turning into monsters, or she's actually being transported into another kingdom. I feel like the game doesn't do a good job clarifying what the intended narrative emotion that they want you to feel in those moments. And what ends up happening is that, like I said, it ends up making the story not feel, it ends up not feeling like there is a story, just things are happening. Because the main through line of the story is she found a letter from Carol, and actually no, that's not entirely correct. The entire game, I mean up until where I am basically, she's still chasing this one letter that she hasn't properly fully read. She's just chasing this letter throughout the whole game and not getting it, and then things happen around her. There isn't really a narrative per se, other than she has one goal and then things are happening around her, if you know what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't feel like she has much agency outside of just doing the puzzles. She doesn't have like agency in where she's going or what she wants to do. It's just kind of, you know, horror elements are happening. There's a story. And like I said, I'm on chapter 7 out of 10, so I'm like 60 to 70% of the way through the game. And it feels like it hasn't actually, the story hasn't progressed, is what I mean. It's that she's still just chasing the letter, but it doesn't feel like we've gone anywhere with that. It doesn't feel like we've actually gained knowledge about what's going on. and it doesn't feel like she's gone. It doesn't feel like she's been given any agency in trying to progress what her story is or what she's about or anything about her character. So I've had a lot of criticisms about this game, and like one of the only good, I mean, I don't want to say one of the only good parts, because I do think there are some interesting puzzles. I think that when the horror elements actually do hit, for example, when there are explicit chase sequences versus this sort of multiple room open area type of sneaking type thing, I think the horror does hit. They do a really good job at actually making you feel scared and making those sort of chase sequences feel interesting. But like I said, I do have a few problems with some of these stealth sequences. Some of the puzzles are really good. Some of them are really, I wouldn't say atrociously bad, but incredibly dull. I have a lot of problems with the writing and the characters and how they interact with each other, how the story is presented. You know what this game makes me feel like? It makes me feel like if somebody wrote a movie about this game, I would actually enjoy it a lot more than playing this game. It really is a shame because it feels like so much love and effort went into the creation of this game. Like I said, this type of hand-drawn animation is extremely difficult to do, and it takes a really long time. But playing this game makes me feel like I would enjoy this a lot more as its own movie than this sort of 6 to 8 hour game experience. It really is a shame because the game does have a lot of potential, I think. I think it has a lot of potential for it to be exciting and interesting and cool, but it's just sort of an okay game that you might enjoy if you like stealth and you like the horror themes and you just love the animation. Because like I said, the animation is beautiful. It just has a few visual problems because of the way it's implemented with the gameplay, but cutscenes are amazing. I love the cutscenes. But yeah, that's By Sweet Carol. A tragically average experience, in my opinion. The game is about $24.99 on Steam or your regional equivalent. My name has been Tokimaru. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.